Hello, everybody here from Riviera Maya. First of all, I'm going to thank everybody to be here, the audience, of course, and my guests for this debate from poverty to prosperity in Latin America, which is a very interesting title, because I think that maybe if this debate was being held some 30 years ago, the name could have been From Dictatorship to Democracy. And we will have plenty of our countries that will be ruled by dictatorships at that time, with all the problems that this sort of system brings. So first of all, let me present all the guests here and thank them very much for their presence here. On my left here, we have Isabel Cecilia de Santmalo de Alvarado, Vice President of Panama, with a long career in sustainable development and implementing policies of development. We have Brian Gallagher there, President and CEO of United Way Worldwide, an important institution present in tens of countries all over the world, doing this very important work, being this sort of interface between civil society, private sector, and government in lots of different projects that ranged from education to public health, among many, many others. We have there Alencar Morales, which is from Costa Rica. He's a so-called global shaper from the WEF, which is some young, brilliant talents that are helping to build and to shape our future. He's got a very important mission here because his input is from the original peoples from this region, Latin America. And if there is an issue that is rarely spoken about, or at least in this sort of forum, I think is one about indigenous people. And if we're going to talk about sustainable development, is something that we have to bear in mind. We'll have, of course, Alicia Barcena Ibarra, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, which is the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, well known for those of us that speak Portuguese or Spanish as CEPAL, which is a very well-known name in our neighborhood. And she works with data, she works with analysis, she has a long, long career in the UN as well, also working in development programs, and her input will be fundamental as well for our discussion to flow. And last but not at all least, the one that maybe wouldn't need any sort of presentation, which is Professor Joseph Stiglitz from the University of Columbia. And among, let's say, some 40 titles that you have, I could choose some of it. One of these would be Professor of Economics in Columbia, but you also are a former aide in the White House. You also helped coordinate a commission on reforming the financial sector, and of course, winner of 2001 Nobel Prize in Economics, and one of the most preeminent neo-Keynesians around the world in these times where investment from public sector and different sorts of actors are less talked than the measures of austerity and reforming that are very much needed, but don't fill the whole debate, I think. And I'm going to start here on my left. As Panama has this very privileged position, being in the middle of East and West, in a time when Latin America, the whole Latin America is looking sometimes eastwards, either to invest in Africa and to have there some revenues, or to look for investments from Europe that is coming from this huge crisis, or our region is also looking westwards to Asia, mainly looking for markets, looking for investments as well. From your very privileged point of view, how do you see the situation of the region, with also all your background in development projects in the region and with the UN?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the opportunity of sharing my thoughts, and with this privileged panel. Really, thank you. I truly appreciate it. From Panama, as you mentioned, being in the crossroads of the Americas, and as I say, Panama has been globalized before globalization was a popular word. I think we have important challenges, but I do have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope on two things particularly. First of all, our young people, our youth. when you hear them talking, it's a completely different vocabulary and exchange from what I remember from that time. We used to talk. I remember my time at the UN. I always said we preached to the converted. We used to talk about development, poverty, inequality to the same group of people. Nowadays, the fact that we have these conversations with enterprises, with entrepreneurs, with young people, has just placed the issues at the center of the discussion, and that gives me a lot of hope. And when you listen to the young people talk, for them, the issues of gender, that to my generation are an issue, it's not an issue to them. They really have a feeling of equality in terms of gender that we didn't have before. They have a feeling for the issue of the environment. They have outrage for the disrespect for the environment, and they have a true conscience of the need to conquer inequality and to have a fairer world and to have a more a scenario of more participation for everybody. So youth gives me a lot of hope, and the fact that these issues are no longer the issues of academia. When Professor Stiglitz started talking about this, and these were things that, you know, business people at the time perhaps thought was not their business. Now, most people, we all think it's our business. Mm-hmm. So that gives me a lot of hope. But it really worries me that if we do not change the speed at which we are attacking inequality, it will take us just too long. In Latin America, we have too many people that are just out. They live in another world. Mm-hmm. And we need to bring them into development. We need to give them the tools through education, through opportunities, so that we can truly fight inequality and poverty, and, you know, not in 50 years, in a shorter span of time.
Yes, so we came from a long way about fighting inequality. There are lots of victories, but there's lots to be done still, yeah? And I'm going to take for the point of youth that you mentioned to talk to Mr. Gallagher there. You work very much with not only youth, but also early childhood and education. And I'd like to hear your perspective on things that you've been seeing around the world that also give you hope that we may be going the right direction in our region as well.
Well, I guess what gives me hope is I would echo young people. I would also say that digital technology and technology generally is, as long as people have access to it and access to information, then our systems can operate at the same speed as commerce. Mm-hmm. Because what our experience is that business always goes first, innovates first, drives productivity, creates value, makes money. Government's a little slower, civil society is a little slower again. People are just slower to take mm-hmm. advantage of it. So education systems were built for a different time. Government systems for a different time. Healthcare systems for a different time. NGO systems for a different time. And they're too slow. And so what gives us hope is watching very localized government, businesses, NGOs working together to solve problems. Mm-hmm. And use jobs as an example. There are jobs that exist, people that need jobs, but the training systems, education systems don't match them very well. So what you see is local innovation of putting those two things together, the marketplace and the job seeker together at a much faster pace. And mm-hmm. early childhood is the long way to think about it, but it's simply trying to fill the pipeline of the youngest in society mm-hmm. to be prepared for an education system that will change. It's just going to change slower than the economy overall, and therefore it creates this gap.
And taking from this point that Mr. Gallagher just mentioned, which is connecting different sectors of society, the private sector, the public sector, when we put the question for Latin America about our indigenous peoples, the original peoples of this region, the ones that, let's say, own the land firsthand, but aren't much listened to when people are deciding very important questions, let's say some infrastructure, big projects that are going around, either in Peru or even in my native country, Brazil, as well, when you see those big dams being built in indigenous people land. I would like to have your input, Alan Kai, about your work with indigenous people, their plight, and what sort of balance can we find in this relationship between society as we see it and the original society that were here even before Europeans and all the other people came in.
Sure. Well, first of all, this is a great space for being able to talk about a sector that traditionally has been very invisible in terms of politics and these types of discussions. And I guess one of the elements that kind of separates two worlds, let's say, has to do with the way we conceive the world and we relate to it. So this usually leads to certain conflicts when it comes to, let's say, development projects that in economical terms might seem very good as an investment and providing electricity and things like those, but on the other hand, you have very negative impacts on a sector of society that doesn't have the political muscle to be able to change part of the decision making that goes on. And what's a huge concern actually in the region is that this is a trend that we see in all countries, even like in my country, in Costa Rica, we have these types of projects that are being carried out, but they don't really respect the rights of indigenous peoples. And I guess one of the starting points that we should be working on is in terms of how we build trust between the different stakeholders in all of this, because if we see the history of indigenous peoples in terms of human rights violations, of land grabbing and different elements that we have in our region, then building that relationship between the state and indigenous peoples is a fundamental step. And we have been elaborating in the past few years in how the relationship between indigenous peoples and the state should be taking place in terms of mechanisms such as consultation, which are the representative institutions that indigenous peoples may have. And this way, instead of imposing different solutions or models, it's a way of working together in order to see if the solutions that are being proposed that are actually culturally appropriate for a people, and what's the say that indigenous peoples have with regards to all these projects. And that's a trend that we're seeing that, for example, within our human rights system in the Americas, we have one of the most progressive human rights systems in the world. But we continue seeing more cases coming to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and the court that are telling states like there are certain things that are not being done in a good way, and we should start modifying those relationships. And unless we want like a very contentious relationship, there will be more cases and more cases coming up to these tribunals, and I don't think that that's the way to solve things. It should be sorted out in our countries, right? So that's kind of a trend that we're seeing in the Americas, and it also relates to Africa and Southeast Asia and other countries as well.
We come then to Ms. Ibarra. We know that CEPAL during the last decades have been very, very important in sort of providing data and analysis about our countries. And we know also that data and analysis are fundamental for one thing, which is planning. And we're not seeing much planning, mid-term or long-term planning in this region for quite a while. But I'd like to have also your input about how is this process of gathering information about such different countries in our region. And some of them, we know that this is not always easy. I'm thinking specifically about Argentina the last years, where there have been lots of complaints about the trust that you can have even in the official data. But I'm thinking also about other countries around us. So where is ECLAC in this point in time about giving us this data that we can trust and then can help our government to plan in mid-term and long-term programs?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. And the first thing I want to say is I want to change the name of the panel. Yes, because I don't think it's from poverty to prosperity, the problem of this region. The problem of this region is from inequality to prosperity. We're not the poorest region of the world, we're the most unequal region in the world. So where are we in that sense? We are in a point where I think this region has made some progress in the last 5 years, let's say, since between 2003 and 2008, this region made incredible progress because we had very good prices, commodity prices, we had good rents. It was a good period in many ways. We had fiscal superavits and trade superavit. It was very nice. And I think this region made progress. We took out of poverty, talking about Brazil, around 58 million people. So that's good news. But inequality is still there. And not only income inequality. Let me just figures. You want data. Okay. The 10% richer part of the people in this region are getting 40% of the income, while the 10% poorest are taking only 12%. That's the problem. So the problem is that this rich part of the equation is not paying taxes. Evasion, illusion is part of our problem because there's lack of trust, because people don't think that they should pay, because the government's this, that, and the other. So we need a new social contract to really address this issue of inequality. But it's very huge. And talking about young people, I have to say this region has around 143 million young people between, let's say, 14 and 29 years old, all right? But the problem is that the demographics of this region, if we are getting older, I mean, like me, of course, but anyway, but what are we leaving behind? We're leaving the young people a big legacy, because who's going to pay for the social security of the young people if today 38% of the people in this region do not have access to pensions, for example? It's a lot. If women could get the same jobs as men, just the same, not more. If they can get the same salary as men, not more, the same, you can reduce poverty from 1% to 15% in Bolivia, for example. Just if we have a salary equalization of this. So these are the inequalities we are talking about. Inequality is not inevitable. Inequality can be addressed through public policies. And looking to the future, I have to say that the United Nations is getting ready for the post-2015 development agenda. And I think if the world agrees on these 17 development objectives, that's going to be very powerful. These objectives are universal. They're looking for equality, not only poverty, but for example, to give a very concrete, you said that we should say concrete things. All right. The world is getting ready, and this region must get ready, my dear Isabel, to eradicate extreme poverty to zero. Zero is the only, I think is the only acceptable percent of extreme poverty is zero. So to do that, we have to take out of poverty 67 million people. If we were able to get 58 between 2002 and 2014, I think we can do the same thing in the next 15 years. But we need, and here's Professor Stiglitz, we need to be anti-cyclical in terms of fiscal policy. Because if the governments are going to start doing adjustments, as they did in Europe, we're on the wrong way. And as you said, this region is very heterogeneous. Why are we cutting back fiscal spending on those economies that do have some fiscal space? There are others that don't have any. Venezuela doesn't have any, we know that. But we do know that other countries do have fiscal space. Please don't cut the whole social spending. What do we have to preserve, from my perspective, in Latin America? Social programs, investment, investment, and investment. Instead of consumption. We have been a region of consumption. And the last point in this first round is this first round, of course, is sustainability. I mean, what are we doing? We have to change the paradigm. This paradigm, we have to move from the culture of privilege to the culture of equality, for God's sake. From the culture of extractivism to the culture of sustainable development. And the third thing is we cannot keep on benefiting capital over labor all the time. This region is sending capital out of the region, illicit funds, $150 billion illicit going. What's illicit? Illusion, evasion, companies that invest in our region don't pay taxes, etc., etc. We are receiving foreign direct investment, 170 billion, more or less the same. Then you say ODA, oh, all countries are fighting for official development assistance. Forget it, it's only $10 billion, 15 times less than the illicit funding that is going out. And then our poor migrants that nobody wants, they are sending money back in $62 billion. So if the financing of development is an issue that we have to discuss seriously, and we need the companies, the private sector to sit down around the table with us, with the governments, with the civil society, and we need to discuss how do we build a new social contract for the future.
And now we reach Professor Stiglitz, who is going to wrap this up. I think that agreeing more than disagreeing with Ms. Ibarra.
And everybody,
from what you've heard here, when you look at Latin America nowadays, do you see the glass more full or empty? Because we look around and we read our papers, we listen to our analysts, and there is this pessimistic view all over the place about what's going on. And we're seeing over and over the same formulas that have been tried in other places, talking again about austerity, that the government must show austerity first if they want to ask society also to spend less and to fight inflation, to help to fight inflation. The problem with this investment is one very, very strong, and with China slowing down a bit, who is going to invest in this region?
I think what's been raised here is true not only in Latin America, but actually in the United States and many other countries. First, I think the point that was made about the optimistic, not only the youth, but even adults have recognized the importance of inequality. Last year at Davos, when they talked about what were the risks, they asked the businessmen, and people, and mostly men, they said, what were the risks? Oh, at the very top of the list was inequality. And I really do think it's a serious risk to our economy. The fact that even in the Republicans in the United States are now talking about the extremes of inequality is a change in the way of the game. It's not something that's about the politics of envy, but it's really a major social problem. What gives me a little hope, but it's 50% empty and 50% full, is that there is this lively debate about austerity, that at least Latin America has not swallowed that kind of austerity Kool-Aid. It would be amazing if they had, because you look at what it's done in Europe. You know, the crisis began in 2007 and 8. We're talking about 2015. Latin America talked about the lost decade. Yeah. I think Europe is talking about a lost quarter century. But the half-empty story is that there are many governments that seem to have ignored the lesson. And I think Alicia is exactly right. There are some governments that don't have any space, you know, that can't borrow. But there are many governments that can. You know, and in a way, this is a really good time to invest, particularly in people and infrastructure, connectivity, because interest rates have almost never been as low, even for emerging markets. The United States faces negative real interest rates, but even Mexico was facing very low.
Brazil is going high a bit.
Yeah,
lately,
but you're facing a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah, but the point is, if you look at these countries and you look at the real returns on those investments, and you look at the real cost of capital, your balance sheet, by making those investments, your asset side of your balance sheet is going up so much more than the liability side that you would be richer. Now, finally, let me say, you know, sort of, again, half empty, half full. To me, I find it amazing that, say, America's leading companies that have enormous ingenuity have used that ingenuity for avoiding taxes. You know, we're talking about Google, Apple, you know, really clever ideas like something called the double Irish, so that they exist in hyperspace and they don't pay taxes essentially anywhere. So the fact that this goes on and there's not even a sense of moral compunction, and they say, what is the remedy? The remedy is to lower the tax rates to such a low level that we don't care about whether we pay. That's not the answer. I mean, they're part of our society. They have benefited enormously. Who paid for the creation of the internet? It was government who paid for the citizens here, who paid for even the first browser. That was paid for by government. And yet they're willing to take and not to give back. Finally, let me just mention one more optimistic note, and that is, I've been very critical at various times of the IMF. We used to joke in terms of the partnership between IMF and the World Bank. The IMF would create poverty and we would work to reduce it. So we had a synergy there, a business synergy. But that's changed in a way. And one of the big messages that the IMF has been making around the world, and very persuasively, is that you could have stronger economic growth if you had more equal societies. So they're no longer viewed as a trade-off, they're really viewed as a complement. And that new insight should really inform us about, about how to go to pick up what Alicia says, from inequality to shared prosperity.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. I'd just like to wrap up this first part of our session here. We're going to do a quick break, and we're coming back in some seconds for the second part, where we're going back to some of the issues raised here by everybody. Thank you. Coming back for the second and last part of our session here, and I want to do another round, but I'm going to mix a bit the things and the questions and the people whom I'm asking to. And I'm going to talk to Mr. Gallagher here about what sort of innovation are you seeing in your work doing this bridge between civil society, government, private sector in lots of different programs that are helping you to move forward in United Way worldwide?
So we all agree inequality is an issue. It's an issue in the US, it's an issue in Korea, it's an issue in Japan, it's an issue in Latin America. And yet, if you had government leaders defining inequality and what ought to be done about it, they would probably be different than how corporate leaders define it and what ought to be done about it, and what citizens say ought to be done about it. So we agree we have the same issue, we have the same opportunity, we don't work together to create a social contract that has the same goals. So when we see change happen at scale, whether it's education or homelessness or access to health care, it's when different sectors at whatever level, local, state or provincial level, federal level, get together and agree on the goals. That we are going to create inclusive growth that is balanced both between profitability and job creation. And we are going to create strategies together that marry government funding for job training and apprenticeships and education with jobs that are actually existing in the economy. We're then going to define roles for government, nonprofit, employers, and then importantly, where we see innovation is when there's an agreement on metrics. How would you define success in terms of education at a provincial, at a local, or at a federal level? And then you can get to work. We find all the time governments, companies, and nonprofits working on the same issue separately. And it only works, innovation only really happens in our world at scale when you put it together. And I should say, just in Latin America, we work with almost 700 companies, 200,000 donors, individual donors from those companies, local NGOs across 11 countries on things like early childhood education and supporting kids in school and working with governments in cooperation. And until you get an agreement on goals, strategies, metrics, the progress is incremental, not scaled.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, of course.
That's been very hopeful in the United States and some other countries is we've had a real gridlock in Washington. 70% of Americans think there should be a raise in the minimum wage, which I said it was the level that it was almost a half century ago, adjusted for inflation. So we've had gridlock, and the response has been massive civil society action, and city after city has raised the minimum wage. Seattle has doubled the minimum wage. So what this says is the power, I think, of civil society, and the fact that sometimes when there's gridlock at one level, you can get action at a lower level.
From our data, we see that those countries that make the most advances were those where minimum wage was raised in a level, I would say, I wouldn't say exaggerating, but it has to be elevated. This country, for example, in Mexico, minimum wage is going down. So is that a comparative advantage to pay the workers very little? I don't think so. Is that the way we're going to enhance productivity? Wrong. So I think that we need the workers and the employers to sit back in the table, agree upon minimum wages, but also agree upon another thing you mentioned, which I like very much, which is innovation. You see, I think that together with the package of salary increase, there has to be an innovation increase. That means that the workers should get also from the companies and the employers a package of how do they raise their capabilities and their skills. I think this would be great if they could be part of the negotiation with, between employers and workers.
But can I just mention one statistic that I think has had a lot of effect in the discussions in the United States and Mexico and some other countries, is that if you look, say, in the United States over the last 40 years, productivity has doubled. But wages have actually stagnated or declined. So this is almost the first time that there's been this gap between increase in productivity and the movement in wages. And the same thing, I've seen data from Mexico that's similar, and I haven't seen all the countries, but I suspect that this is not.
Replicates there as well.
So this is a change in the way the market economy is operating, and we have to go back and ask, why is that?
I'll like to turn with Mrs. Vice President here, because I know that you have quite an experience also in building consensus and in negotiation, to be in the table with different parts. How difficult is it to build this consensus, even if you have common goals? And how has been your experience in this area?
I love Alicia's suggestion of a social contract. At the end, I truly believe that's what we need to get everybody engaged with the same objective. For example, the framework, the legal framework that allowed Panama to receive the Panama Canal was a result of a very difficult but successful consensus building process with workers, enterprises, government, civil society. So it can definitely be done. I am certain there's no other way. And at the end, I really enjoy Professor Stiglitz mentioned to the fact that it's not because it's just, it's because it's good for business.
What's the role of the indigenous peoples in this new social contract if it comes to life?
I'll give you some numbers now that we're talking about numbers, and just to frame on the opportunities that we have. Just to give you an idea, let's say within the Amazon basin, indigenous territories and the overlaps with protected areas correspond to about 25 to 40% of the whole Amazon basin. And the territories of indigenous peoples have within the Americas about 11% of the forests in the region. And globally speaking, over 80% of the healthy ecosystems are within indigenous territories. So if we're talking about innovation and building new contracts in society, indigenous peoples definitely have a role with regards to sustainability and building a healthier environment for us all, right? So I feel that in that regard, building these relationships and not just public and private relationships that can be built, but also with different stakeholders such as indigenous peoples are a must.
Can I add just one point to that? There was an important treaty that was signed a long time ago called the Biodiversity Agreement.
And you're part of this.
And unfortunately, the United States refuses to ratify it. And part of that agreement was that to protect the biodiversity that is indigenous. And unfortunately, I mean, from what I see, American drug companies have been opposing it because they're afraid they will have to pay fees to the indigenous who have kept and preserved this biodiversity. And meanwhile, they're demanding very high prices for the chemicals that are created in our universities and then they market.
I'm sorry to interrupt right now because we're in the middle of a very nice conversation, but our time is running out. And I'd like to open the floor for some questions here.
Thank you. My name is Salil Shetty. I'm the Secretary General of Amnesty International. We have a very distinguished panel here, so I'm sure that you would have thought about these things. Because one of the things that surprised me in the conversation was, if we all say that inequality is a big problem, we need to fix it. I hope you'd agree that the drivers of inequality are mostly political and social. I mean, it's an economic phenomenon, it's a consequence. But the social and political drivers on this continent, effectively, we are describing it in Amnesty International as a hidden human rights crisis, because you have massive levels of violence and discrimination against specific groups of people. So if you take, for example, homicides, this continent has the highest level of homicides now anywhere in the world. And if you take the Brazilian case, most of them are Afro-descendants, young male. So 55,000 men dying in the favelas mostly. So an underlying question is, if you don't have a human rights-based approach to development which tackles discrimination, accountable governance, rule of law, how are we going to fix this problem? Because we'll be dealing only with the symptoms.
Can I just make two comments? One is to pick up what Alicia said earlier, that, and echoes what you just said, that inequality is basically a choice. It's a result of the way our political system works. It's the decisions.
This was for human rights as well.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting things that Alexis de Tocqueville observed and wrote about the French Revolution is that the revolution really took hold once extreme poverty and prosperity started getting closer together. When I became a little bit more in a position to see what I didn't have. And one of the things, so when you have abject poverty and you don't see the prosperity, you can keep that very separate. What's happening right now, to Salil's point, is that there are as many smart devices on the planet as there are people. There will be 10 billion smart devices by 2018. People know what they don't have.
If I can also say something very quickly, I think it's exclusion is a problem. And if people are excluded and you don't have the means to redistribute power, and you have impunity, because that's the other problem. You protect the elite, and the privileges, I mean, you have the perfect torment.
Professor Stiglitz, with the advent of the singularity in artificial intelligence, we could face for the first time the possibility of exponential lower costs of everything. And what could this mean to inequality?
Well, I do hope we get vastly wealthier, and I do think that innovation eventually has that potential. But let me make two observations. One of them is that actually, although we all talk about innovation, it isn't showing up in our GDP statistics. So that raises two questions. Is our statistics wrong? Or is there more excitement about the innovation than is deserved? There are some advances, but there have always been some advances. In fact, some people looking at the history of innovation say the innovation of electricity, there have been a lot more important innovations. You don't call it the innovation era, but those really did have a much bigger effect on real growth than some of social media, which is very nice, but may not have the kind of transformative effect on standards of living. So, particularly when we face issues of climate change, that we are, we have some positive things going on, but we also have a real challenge of meeting higher energy costs. So one of my hopes is that if we have all this productivity, some of that will be used so that we don't bake, that we don't have climate change, and that we can prevent the world. And what I find so interesting is that you have these two discussions going on simultaneously. This wonderful world of innovation and a widespread view that we cannot move away from dependence on fossil fuel. Now, you ask the question, if innovation is so great, that's not a very big problem from a physics point of view, being able to get solar energy. And, I would say, use all that innovation ability to solve this little problem that will save the planet, rather than enable us to talk a little bit more at a lower cost.
Got one more question here.
Professor Stiglitz, you talked about rules being to be the fundamental way we could fix it. I can't imagine a greater crisis than we went through in 2007 and 2008, when it was clear the financial systems didn't work. That was the opportunity for those rules to be instituted. As many of us saw in the New York Times last year, the hedge fund managers who lost money received billions of dollars each in a climate where there should be rules to deal with that. So where is the appetite or the signs that we're actually going to adopt the rules that we need to address inequality, even though there seems to be in certain circles agreement about it?
The fact that we failed so badly in 2009 has given rise to a lot of anger in our population. And, you know, just to give you an example, the president announces the recession is over, and in the following 3 years, 91% of the growth goes to the top 1%. There's a dissonance between an announcement that the recession is over and what people are feeling.
Unfortunately, we won't have time for another question, but I'd like to ask each and every one of you to give final thoughts about what we've been discussing here for almost an hour, and to give your perspectives for our region, starting here with you, Mrs. Vice President, please.
We share a common view that inequality is not only wrong, but it's not good for anybody, it's not good for business. And inequality in all terms, inequality in terms of income, inequality in terms of rights, including access to information, including gender, access to opportunities, including gender balance. And I think the important thing is to know that all of us, no matter where we are, we can all contribute to fighting inequality and to achieving equality. It's not an issue to governments, it's not an issue to enterprises, it's not an issue to civil society, it's an issue, in my belief, to every individual, and all of us can contribute in our own large or small way to it, not because it's good, but because it's better for everybody at the end.
It's clear to me that we live in a historically disrupted world. The globalization of the economy, followed by digitalization of the world, has created disruption in speed that maybe the professor would know from studying so many different periods in time, whether it's unprecedented or not. To me, it feels very challenging. Having said that, you know, economic revolution always creates kind of a mess that society then has to clean up for the next number of years. What I'm optimistic about is where you started. You know, the region is, you know, to me it's in a pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid, you need effective, transparent institutions. More and more you see that in the region. You need effective policy. More and more you start to see that in the region. But you need normative behavior and values at the top, because the institutions won't change, the policies won't change without individuals creating a set of normative values and demands, hopefully peacefully. And I think access to information gives us that opportunity.
Alan Kai, please, your final thoughts.
I feel that during the past few years we've had, like on our side, on indigenous peoples, speaking specifically on that, an opportunity to start building these new relationships. But sometimes what is frustrating is that the speed of those relationships doesn't improve as fast as we would like them to. But we definitely feel that there is a lot that we can provide to all these processes, like global crisis on issues regarding climate change and what we were talking about, ecosystems as well. So I guess it's just how we can work and have more awareness that the solutions don't necessarily come from a desk, but actually through participatory processes, and how we can involve different sectors in building and generating those solutions that we really need as countries and as a region as well.
Please, Ms.
Thank you. I think that we need to really look at the rules of the game, the rules of engagement between the private, the public, and the state. We need really to sit down and discuss the rules of engagement again, and build what I would call new consensus or social contracts around, at least I can identify 6 topics. One is the fiscal. I think this region needs to move from 18% to 20% of fiscal burden, which is not much. We're talking about $60 billion more. Investment, we have to move from 22% to 27%. Natural resources governance, you said that the indigenous peoples live in 11% of the forestry of Latin America.
Yeah, exactly.
You know how big are our forests? Is the same territory as China. 9 million square kilometers is the forest we have. So the indigenous people live in 11% of the Chinese territory, if I may say. And the fourth is this labor pact. I think we need a union, employees, new revision of things, because we cannot continue punishing the workers. And the fifth is the sustainable development. I really believe we need to look into the climate change deal in coming up in Paris this year, and the post-2015 development agenda, in December, sorry, and the post-2015 development agenda, which is looking to 2030. We shouldn't look to 2015, we should look in what do we want 15 years from now. And I think this is something that we really need to work on. So social contract, for me, is extremely important, and more participatory processes.
Last words, please, Professor.
Let me just add, because I agree with everybody again, but let me add one thing I think that we haven't really stressed as much, which is not only is there inequality of income and wealth, rights, but most importantly, inequality of opportunity. And we've had discrimination on the basis of gender, the basis of race, ethnic group, indigenous people. It's a moral issue, because to me it is a very moral issue, but it's also an economic issue, because and it's a political issue, because it divides our society and it really weakens our economy. And then finally, when we would talk about opportunity, one of the most important opportunities is for people to contribute to our society by working. And if we don't have our economy functioning well, then there aren't jobs. So the most important responsibility for both the business community and government is the macroeconomic management, and making sure that it's managed in a way that keeps our economy at prosperity. Austerity is the wrong policy. And this is really a time when, with low interest rates and underutilized resources, that we really should be stimulating the economy and making the investments in people and roads and connectivity that will really give the opportunity, that will really transform Latin America for the next 30 years.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you again, all the audience. Thank the panelists to give their time, their thoughts here. I think we had a very, very nice discussion here. There's food for thought for lots of people here around. And I'll thank you, everybody here from Riviera Maya.